Hello, everyone. Welcome to AI with GennAi. Today, I'm joined by Tracy Pizzo Frey. She is the founder and CEO of Restorative AI, a boutique consulting firm helping organizations ensure that the creation, use, and adoption of AI contributes to the future we all deserve. She has an extensive background in the applied use of advanced technologies in both public and private sector organizations across the globe. Tracy got her start in responsible AI during her 11-year stint in Google, where she was the managing director for outbound product management in Google Cloud. And in 2017, she created and led all of Google Cloud's responsible AI work. Now senior advisor on AI to Common Sense Media, she evaluates AI products that impact kids and education. Tracy has appeared in numerous media outlets, including Axios, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Wired, and Good Morning America. She graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University with joint degrees in studies of women, gender and sexuality, and educational psychology, and received an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Tracy has been a product manager, product marketer, environmental science educator, teacher, researcher, and professional hip-hop dancer. But her most treasured job is being a mother to two extraordinary humans. I'm so delighted to welcome you here today, Tracy.
It's so great to see you, Jen. So thank you very much for having me.
Great. Well, we heard such an impressive professional bio from you and a little touch on some of the more interesting aspects and the core values there. But as we always like to do here, we want to go a little bit behind that bio. Tell us a bit more about what brought you to human-centered technology that encouraged you to get more into that responsible AI ethical side.
Sure. Well, I will say that being in technology at all is still very much a surprise to me and anybody who knows me. And so it almost makes sense to start back a little bit. I was raised by two highly principled leaders, both of whom really focused on children. My mother was a child advocate, worked on Capitol Hill and in the Carter White House. And my father is a pediatrician whose focus is infectious disease and psychology. And he was at NIH for 30 years. Then at Boston Children's, he was physician chief. He was the dean of Stanford Med School. And they both are not only very principled about their work, but they also really speak truth to power. And so I saw that a lot growing up. My father was really at the forefront of the HIV/AIDS crisis when it first started. And because he worked with children, he was really seeing the stigma that anyone with HIV/AIDS at that time experienced. People were afraid to touch them. People were afraid to, just a really very awful time. President Reagan at the time came to visit the NIH, and he was not giving funding towards AIDS research at the time. And he also had a lot of his own biases and fears and prejudice about people who were living with HIV/AIDS. My father toured him around his clinic and around the NIH. And at one point, they were in a room with a beautiful baby boy who was HIV positive. My father took this child and said, "Here, Mr. President, you hold him." Handed him to President Reagan, who had all of these fears. There's actually a remarkable picture, if anyone wants to go look it up, of this moment, after which President Reagan funded HIV/AIDS research. I'm sure it was not the only reason, but that sort of modeling for me has always informed my career. I've tried to take jobs that I don't have a mission or values that I really care about. That doesn't work well for anyone. My path into responsible AI particular was when I moved from Google for Education to Cloud AI. I asked if in this new job, I could help the team think about how to develop products while thinking through and designing how we account for long-term impacts. But I honestly had no idea at the time that I was saying that, what I was actually getting into, and that would be this convergence of all of these different paths and moments in my career prior to that really came together, made it very much my North Star.
Wow, so many things resonated there from the statement about speaking truth to power. So we're going to talk more about that today in terms of speaking truth to senior leadership in some of these large companies, how to bring humans into the story. So that is a story of the baby. And there are humans behind, not just for us, the AI technology we're talking about, but it's always been humans behind. Statistics and data can hide the fact that these are all individual people being affected or not being excluded from these types of things. Really important to see how those values you saw lived by the people around you, and then seeing, oh, I kind of almost fell into this area, but that was by values coming together, like you said, of
Yes.
like wanting to follow your values into the work that you did. So yeah, love that, especially the truth to power. I think we need that courageous leadership from people like you, of being able to say, like, this is worth talking about. It's worth pointing out the people behind and the data. And then the third point that stood out was related to that is everyone brings their own personal biases to the situation. So it's about recognizing it in both yourself and others. And I think that can lead to better outcomes. As you said, this may have been a factor or the main factor of a massive decision change. And that is about, I do believe that's what addressing biases can get us all to better outcomes. So love all of that. Thank you for sharing. So as we bring that into the kind of practical space, we get into our T3 trio, which are the standard questions we ask all of our guests. So our listeners can kind of see how everyone thinks so differently and richly about the same questions. The first one is about how AI is shaping current organizations or industries that you currently work in. So what are the areas that you see most interestingly being changed with AI at the moment?
Yeah, I should say, sort of at the outset that because I focus so much on risk assessments and evaluation and harm, I often can sound very much like I'm anti any of this, which is not the case. I think, like you said, these are things that are really worth talking about. And one of the things that, drawing on something you were saying about the people behind the data, one of the things that I like to say a lot is that when we talk about data, we're talking about, for the most part, really tiny individual bits of humanity. And if you think about it that way, not even just individual people or groups of people, but all of these tiny moments of humanity, that's what is informing all of these tools that we are using either knowingly or unknowingly today. That is really shaping not only their abilities and their effectiveness, but also their risks in many, many ways. And I think as we sort of look at how all of this is happening, my worry right now, well, I have a lot, but one of them is that we are in such a rush to implement AI, and we are being told that it can do all of these things, that shaping of industries and economies and human experiences can happen without us really questioning whether or not that's what we want, or whether or not these are doing things in an effective way. And so while there are so many ways that AI can benefit us, everything from making the tech that we rely on more inclusive and fair. And that's something that I think we haven't even really started exploring in how we build AI. Like, can we actually use this to make things better for everyone, particularly for marginalized communities, help make new discoveries, and even help us connect with other humans. But right now, I'm not sure that we're actually heading in those directions.
Yeah. And you bring to mind a recent story from Amsterdam where they tried bringing in a more fair welfare system using AI. And they did a lot of the steps that I know you and I have talked about over the years, like involving diverse people, having a set of governance principles, ensuring you're testing for fairness. And they kind of followed all these steps. But the feedback was mostly negative because the very first step was, we don't need this at all. A number of fraud issues, which was the core goal of this, actually was so minuscule that it was a better use of time to actually fix other areas and address other people's needs. And so the feedback was, okay, you did all these steps after the fact that you shouldn't even started. And I hear that quite a bit of just throw AI at the problem. And we're not thinking about, is this the right solution? And then we have to make sure it's a responsible solution. But that first step is so important. So yeah, you bring to mind, like, are we moving in the right direction? Mm-hmm.
And if we end up in a place where the initial line of thinking is, how do we do something without the people whose roles these are, without the questioning of what is the value, where are the places where that's helpful and where are the places where it's really not, then we're going to end up with less effective AI.
And so that's a very good segue to the next question around, what are the ethical challenges or regulatory challenges that are either preventing us from achieving this more responsible way of thinking and implementing AI, or that we need right now to get us better on that path? Tell us a bit of your thoughts around the ethical and regulatory challenges.
Yeah, I think there are a lot, but I want to actually touch on one very important and very timely challenge that is really deeply concerning to me, which is that in the US right now, in the federal budget that's now passed the House and it's making its way into the Senate, there's a small but very, very dangerous section, and that would ban states from regulating AI. So it would ban states from protecting kids and families, all consumers from AI harms until the year 2035 for 10 years. And if that passes, states would not be able to take action against any known or new dangers and harms, things like AI generated sexual material or CSAM, child sexual abuse material, or these social AI companions, which we'll probably talk about later, and the extreme harms we're seeing, particularly with kids and teens happening. So anything having to do with personal data, discrimination, housing, healthcare, all of it, we would not be able, states would not be able to do anything about that. And they wouldn't be able to address anything new that we don't know about yet for a 10-year period. That feels wildly irresponsible to me. And if that passes, I think we are in a really, really difficult situation in the US when it comes to doing the best we can for our people.
I agree. I think the narrative almost being pushed is that, well, AI must move quickly, otherwise the West, US, or otherwise will fall behind China. But I don't think people understand the opportunity cost of that as people and on their children. Dealing with child sexual abuse imagery or any child safety online requires private and public partnership of getting to the right outcomes, and to lose that potential lever of the government at a state level is dangerous to our children and to ourselves. And so I don't think it's hyperbole to say how concerning it is if this passes. I don't think people understand the safety, the harm issues that are going to arise to them, to their families, to their own communities. They're being told a story, but I don't believe that story is comprehensive for everyone's day-to-day lives. I think it's a quite high level what happens to large companies. I think obviously at a societal level, we have to be aware of that. And we talk about this. Yes, our day jobs are harms, but we recognize the benefit of these technologies. We want this technology to be beneficial to our
I want them to be wildly successful.
But there's a way of doing it. And I think this has been used as an excuse to do it in a way that is not combining the different approaches. How to drive really quickly on these AI technologies in a responsible way with guardrails. I believe we can do both. And I believe people are choosing not to do it in that combined way. So for your 2050 vision, you can choose which path, or if you think we can thread the line there, where do you see us going?
Yeah, I'm going to take another little turn here because there's another thing that I think is really important and often underappreciated or not well understood, which is the climate impact of AI that I think we're really just starting to see the beginnings of. And so I'll give some really tactical examples of this. So last year in 2024, a researcher estimated that the energy used by a single ChatGPT query, one query, would power a light bulb for 20 minutes. So in comparison, that is 10 times as much energy as a standard Google search query. The data centers that power AI already collectively use more energy than most countries. So Goldman Sachs has estimated that the carbon dioxide emissions of data centers might double by 2030. So that was actually between 2022, was a bit ago. These impacts extend beyond energy use and emissions. There's no standards for how this is measured. There's no requirements for companies to disclose it. And without a change in course, these impacts will worsen. These costs and risks of higher carbon emissions are not distributed equally. Like other environmental risks, marginalized groups are more vulnerable to health impacts, food scarcity, and displacement caused by climate change. I think right now, there's so much hype and excitement that we're not paying attention to these more hidden impacts. We may end up in a situation where we really wish we had, and we had done something about it at this stage, not when we hit real crisis points later. Yep. On the other side of that, and again, this is a very sort of human-centered approach, I actually really fundamentally believe that the superpower of the future is humans who understand what it means to think for themselves, to interrogate the work they're doing, to enjoy the work that they're doing and to know that they can be excellent critical thinkers, collaborators, all of those things. And AI needs to be augmenting that, not replacing that. If we can hold that truth, then I think we are in a really great situation where these tools can complement us in all kinds of different ways, but the humans are really at the forefront of what's needed.
Yeah. And although I encourage the disagreement side, I agree very strongly with you on that, because just at a recent conference I was at, we were talking about the agentic AI being like team members. And I have a very visceral reaction to not saying agentic AI are team members. They're not. Team members are people. They're humans.
Right.
You have to retain that. They are tools. And agentic AI and AI can be amazing tools to augment us. But it really stands out to me when people describe them as team members, because I do think it diminishes the human role and where we will continue to fit in. And I do believe there's a role there. And the New York Times just had an article this week on all the new jobs that could be created with AI. And AI ethicists was one that they see growing, but also quality evaluators and the skills of people with this critical thinking, being able to join together how to think about how the systems could best augment individual roles and be more strategic thinkers. So I see that same opportunity. But I do take issue with some of the descriptors that are emerging and becoming pretty strong about describing agents as team members. And to me, that's a very anthropomorphized way of talking about this technology when it can be an amazing tool, but it's not a person, it's not a team member.
That's right.